Hi, welcome to the Akamai Partner Champions Podcast. I'm Kat Moore, a Senior Channel Marketing Manager here at Akamai Technologies. Thanks so much for joining. This podcast is for Akamai partners, customers, and anyone interested in learning more about technology trends and Akamai. Here we will talk about what's happening in the threat landscape, what organizations are doing to update their technology stack, and more. If you're an account manager at one of Akamai's value-added partners, this podcast can help you identify if an account you're managing has an opportunity to maximize their technology strategy. If you're a customer of one of those partners, you may hear something during this podcast that can help you decide if now's the right time to reach out to your account manager to explore one of the new technologies we're discussing. If you enjoy this podcast, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much, DC, for joining the Akamai Partner Champions Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about API security and just different strategies to uncover API security opportunities. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Thanks, first off, for having me. I really appreciate it, Kathleen. And to all the partners that are attending and listening, we appreciate your attention. So real quick background on myself. I started in tech in 93, 94, I think it was. Sort of went through the first iteration of the web and got into security in 2010 or so. And fraud really is where I started. And then have been with a number of companies throughout the years that have all been acquired or merged in with larger organizations. So I've seen the evolution, I guess you could say, of fraud, security, and how those teams have sort of merged in many organizations. And there's never a dull day, I guess you could say. There's never a dull day in our business, and you never stop learning. That's for sure. So it's a career path that I'm so happy I was lucky enough to find.
Awesome. I mean, with all the different customers that you've spoken to, and all of your different, different scenarios that you've seen, in your experience, why should API security be top of mind for all organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say that, there every few years, 4, 5, 6 years in security, there's always something new that emerges. And API security is one of those categories, right? It's a practice. It's grown. There is an ever expanding surface area, whether it's catering to end user applications or catering to partners. It's all API based. And so with the expansion and utilization, I think most companies are lacking visibility, right? You're in the early days, and what they tend to do is say, gosh, I don't know what I don't know. And nearly not if all of the customers that we've spoken with, visibility has been their biggest concern. And then, of course, detections and alerts, and then, of course, operationalizing all that. But it's, for me, a great, kind of a Wild West environment where we're able to uncover, detect, and demonstrate to customers what's really going on for them. And so that's really the thing that most customers lead into with is initially visibility. Show me what I don't know, and then we show them a lot more. So it's great.
Yeah. What verticals have you seen have more pressure to address API security risk?
Well, financial services has been one of the earliest categories or verticals to come forward. That includes banking, insurance. They're opening up their APIs and allowing partners to access user account data, applications to access user account data, and of course, users to access their user account data. And APIs are really the lifeblood and the connective tissue between these interactions. And so they've been an early adopter. Travel and hospitality has also been an early adopter, and they have marketplaces where they're opening up scheduling, reservation systems, availability systems, and they're all API based. So that's been another vertical as well. Healthcare and life science also. And then I'll say that supply chain. And that's kind of a big category, because what does that mean? Well, we have energy companies, we have oil and gas, and they all have intricate supply chains and environments where APIs are at the center. So I would say while there's some early adopters, ones that are rushing because of the need and the criteria in which they have to operate their business is important. But I think that ultimately APIs, because they're a core and a fundamental aspect of systems and applications talking to each other, are going to become important for everyone. So we don't see it being restricted to a certain few categories. We think it's going to spawn off into just nearly all. Now, having said that, small companies tend to be concerned less. So it's usually your mid-size and your larger enterprises that really have a strategy around API security.
That makes a lot of sense. And, just speaking of strategies around API security, I think a lot of organizations might feel like they've already taken care of it in some capacity, right? They've gone out and bought some sort of cloud-based WAF that has API protection included. They have their API gateways. Even if an organization has made investments in API security, why should they consider additional protection?
Another great question. And I think if, in many customers that we've spoken to, you brought up a good point. They've got an API gateway or they have a WAF, and they'll think, oh, I already have API security because they have authentication in those environments, and user authentication isn't enough. Today, credentials, tokens, all sorts of user access privileges are spilled and available on the web. If they're not spilled and available, you'll have an entity or a fraudster hitting your endpoints, trying to see what works, what doesn't work. And when they identify what does work, they'll get in there and they'll start scraping data and doing nefarious activities. So, it's really comes down to understanding and seeing and having visibility into all the activity. What WAFs and API gateways tend to be really good at is a single moment in time where you access the account. And what we look at is not just the access, and we don't compete with those systems. We complement those systems, like API gateways. We not only look at the transaction at the login, but we stitch together all of their activity inside the environment while they're in the environment. And that's really important to bring context to what a user or a partner is doing when they access an account. There might be an unintended consequence of an API where it's allowing someone to access information that they weren't or shouldn't have been able to access before. Those are things that we can detect. It's an unintended consequence, but APIs themselves, because you've built them and published them into the marketplace and you have user access privilege, doesn't mean they're secure. You've got to really look at what's going on. So shedding light upon all that activity is crucially important, and that's what we do. And we don't compete with those systems that will do your credentialing.
That's really important to call out, because I think that a lot of organizations feel like what I've done is already enough, and it's probably really hard for them to go back and get funding from their CFO, and their CEOs and different boards, that are approving their financing for API security spend. In some of your past experience, what have you seen be the big aha moment where they've said, hey, we have to budget for this thing and we have to go ahead and have additional protection for API security?
So that comes in many different forms. Some clients or prospects that we run POCs with or for, discovery is their big thing. They want to know what they don't know. They're looking for identifying all of the APIs they actually have. They're looking for zombie APIs or APIs that should have been retired years ago when an application was revved and improved, but it's still in use somewhere. Someone's still hitting it. That someone usually isn't the application with the actual user, but it's someone who found the API through the application and they're still trying to ping it and do something, right? So that can be an aha moment. And a posture alert, meaning the posture of the API, if there's data in the clear that's being passed back and forth in the API that shouldn't, can be an aha moment. A runtime alert where it's a token reuse or a credential stuffing event, as an example, is hitting on their APIs and it's gotten or evaded other protections that they have or layers of defense that they have. So we'll stitch together and show them all of that activity. So whether it's runtime, posture, or discovery, there can be aha moments that are attained in any one of them or all of them during a POC. We just don't know until we know. But some clients do come to us and say, "Hey, we want to see a fraudster doing something against our APIs," and so that's their sense of success. Every customer that we go into a POC with, we define what does success look like for you. So we'll set up criteria and we'll work to fulfill on those criteria during the POC. So aha moments can be varied for sure.
That's very helpful. I mean, what else would you like to share about API security that we didn't cover yet?
Well, I think that it's, one of the things that I like to stress is that security is such an evolutionary business practice. And things like operationalizing, what is it that you do when a detection that might be critical occurs? Who gets alerted? Is there automated response? And so operationally, that's been brought to our attention by a number of organizations because this is new. And so I think it's crucial for any company that's going in and looking at exploring an API security project should look to learn along the way. Don't go in with a closed mind. Ask a lot of questions. Collaborate with the vendor partners that you're working with, and look to figure out how does this and how will it fit in with my organization. The way it fits in with a bank or any XYZ bank might be slightly different than the way it fits in for a travel and hospitality firm. You may care about certain types of alerts. You may not care about other types of alerts. So that's kind of what's important. There are a lot of nuances, I think, about how each client considers how API security is going to be important in their business. So I would stress that, always challenge the vendors you work with. Don't be afraid to ask questions and be very curious about the roadmap that vendor partner has in the future and see if those plans fit in well with what it is that you think you're going to need operationally.
Thank you. And, you brought up a good point that I want to, dive a little bit deeper into. Speaking of other vendors that our customers that we're speaking to may have already invested in, it's a little scary when you think about trying a proof of concept or trying to find, more data within your organization. How much time is it going to take? How is it going to work with our existing infrastructure? Can you talk a little bit about how nimble our API security product is and how it pretty much connects with basically any environment?
Yeah. So we are API first, meaning that our system does allow our partners who are sophisticated enough to query into our system via API and pull out or retrieve, whether it's an alert or whether it's a runtime alert or a posture alert, or whether it has something to do with discovery. And so when you talk about being nimble and adaptable, I think it's important to, when you look at a vendor, and identify if it's a closed system or an open system. We've also done a pretty comprehensive integration with Apiro. And we have other partners that we've done integrations with. F5 is an example, Apogee, APIM. We do have to play because APIs exist in a multitude of different environments. We have to play nicely within a multitude of environments. And to solve the API security problem, you really need to be able to collect, if you will, data from a multitude of different sources. We do have customers that have 5 different data sources that we've integrated with, normalized that API traffic into a single pane of glass. And then we have automated response, which goes back to those platforms and puts either a rate limit or a stop on an event, which might be an attack or something that's occurring. So I think it's important to consider those architectures and being open, because open will win in this space. We believe very firmly about that.
Thanks so much for just giving us that additional detail about how we integrate. This has been very helpful, DC. I learned so much more about API security and what we can and cannot do. I hope that the partners listening have learned a lot. And if you want more information around API security, you can find it on akamai.com and also on the partner portal. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kathleen.